So welcome everyone to the Institute of Contemporary Art Boston and tonight's final installment of the Artist's Voice, Matthew Ritchie and Company. And in just a few moments, you'll also hear more of how Matthew continues to collaborate directly with the ICA through a very unique and special museum residency. But before I turn the microphone over to Matthew, I want to be sure to thank Louis Vuitton for not only supporting the work at the ICA, but championing contemporary art throughout the nation. We could not do this work without their support. At this time, I'd like to invite Jenelle Porter, the Northeastern Region Senior Vice President of Louis Vuitton Americas, to share a few words with you.
Monica, thank you very much for the introduction. On behalf of everyone at Louis Vuitton, I just wanted to say how delighted we are to be here tonight and to keep on our ongoing partnership with the ICA. Louis Vuitton as an organization has a very close partnership with arts and culture, and we're very proud and honored to be here tonight to keep on going on the partnership, which has now been going for a number of years with the ICA. It started with the Foster Prize, and the Foster Prize has been going in 2011, 2013, and will be coming on next year as well in 2015, which is a great initiative to honor and to support local artists here in Boston and to give them visibility and support within the local community. So we're very much looking forward to that next year in 2015, and also very honored to be partnering with Matthew and both his teen residency here and the art wall installation at the ICA. So we're very, very proud to be here, honored to see so many of our friends here tonight, and we're delighted to be listening to Matthew about his work and obviously his partnerships going forward. So thank you very much.
Thanks for the lovely introduction. I should mention that I'm doing another project with Louis Vuitton in Miami, opening December 3rd, which is a gigantic roof drawing, allegedly the world's largest, possibly because there are only very few giant roof drawings in the world. But it's going to be an amazing project, so it's nice to have that coincidence. I thought I'd just talk a little bit about my work before this residency, and then Jenelle and I are going to chat about the residency and how much fun we've had doing it. My work is sort of unusual in that it began after a long period of not making any art. And when I came back to being an artist, I was a building superintendent for a long time, I sort of thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I want it to mean something. And I want it to mean something that is consistent, because otherwise what will happen, as happened before, is I'll just lose interest. Perhaps. So this is a list of projects that I've done. They all constitute parts of a larger whole, but they're not, in that sense, a kind of coherent story. They're more like episodes in a dream that you kind of know they all mean something in the order that they came to you, but you don't exactly know why. So these are some projects that have been in the neighborhood. This is at Mass MoCA. This is at MIT. This is not in the neighborhood. This was in Japan. This was a kind of signature look of my work for the early 2000s, this kind of sprawling installation with a number of embedded video elements. There's a video up there inside this piece up here. You could walk inside and look down on it. And a general interest in kind of exploring a vocabulary of both creation and collapse. And that's something that's very much stayed part of my work even today, because I think we're at a very special time. It feels like a transitional moment where we're moving from a world that was very convinced of its own forward momentum to one that is beginning to understand that we may have reached certain kinds of inherent limits. And with those limits come a new kind of challenge that we were talking about before. There's more people than there ever were. There's more devices than there ever were. There are now more devices than there are people. And those devices are talking to each other. There's 12 billion connected devices that talk not to humans, they talk to each other. So what kind of world is this? And also, how are we going to behave inside it? One response of the art world has been to say, well, we'll sort of make a big party. And everyone will be happy. Well, at least everyone who can afford to get to the museum will be happy. And that will be nice. And I'm definitely interested in this idea of a kind of shared community and creating spaces where people can learn how to play. Because this is part of the new connectivity. In this show in London at the White Cube Gallery, you can see these two gentlemen here. This is Bryce and Aaron Desner, and I'm going to be talking about them. But this is a show from 2008, so we've been working together a while now. They're in a band called The National, And Bryce Dessner is also a very well-known young American composer. They created a kind of sound tunnel in this show, which is inside a tower. And the tower is a symbol that I'm going to refer to over and over again. It comes, I'll also be talking about the tarot deck. It comes from the tarot deck. The tower it's the worst card you can draw. When the tower falls, it's the symbol of everything collapsing that you've known. The system is broken and can never be put back together. And of course, in 2001, that's exactly what happened in New York. And this kind of quasi-utopian world that had begun to emerge under Bill Clinton and Gorbachev kind of got placed into a different context. So this painting, which is now in the collection of the ICA, is about that moment and what happened afterwards. It was a catastrophe. This is one thing I also love as an artist is diagrams. This is the famous diagram, the catastrophe diagram by Rene Thom. And you can see it's a sort of pattern of how people or animals behave. And there's a moment, there's the growling, and there's the avoiding, and there's the retreating, and then there's the moment of attack, which is the catastrophe. So the question is what underlies all that? What's the structure? After this kind of that first body of work, I started getting very interested in what are the force relations that underlie the universe? How are things tied together? And this is a project I worked on with a pair of architects called Ben Aranda and Chris Lash. And it's been made up of a simple module, this little tetrahedron. And the tetrahedron is a four-sided pyramid, basically, with the top and bottom sides cut off. And it embodies the structural relationship of the four forces of the universe. And we went on to build some really quite nice things out of this kind of a cosmic Lego. This is it in Sevilla, this is it in Vienna, this is it in Istanbul. So this structure right now it's in Germany, gets taken apart and built, and it's a different shape every time we do it. So I was starting to get interested in this idea of something that was very mutable, very public, and it had another question. It was for a very eccentric and wonderful Viennese collector called Francesca von Habsburg, who was like, well, that's great, but what I'd really like, well, every week she would say something, what I'd really like is Chinese acrobats. And what I'd really like is clowns. And what I'd really like is speedboats. At one point we talked about a sailboat, possibly buried in the ocean, put it in the desert. But then one day she said, what I'd really like is music. And I was like, well, I know just the guys for this. So we made it a musical instrument. And I'm going to guess that none of the links that I've embedded here are going to work. Is that right? But inside it are 40 musical compositions, each one of which is by a different composer, including Bryce Dessner, who is a partner here at the ICA. So that became the basis for my gallery practice, making paintings, and also the basis for a performance called The Long Count at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, which is a cosmological song cycle with a number of people sort of sweeping from the past. I don't know if any of you are old enough to cherish a band called The Breeders, but I do. Kim and Kelly Deal were in it. Another pair of twins. This is Tunde Adebimpe from TV on the Radio, Shara Warden. And at the same time, I worked on a project at the Guggenheim, which is called Hypermusic, which is a projective opera with a physicist called Lisa Randall, who's up here at Harvard, who had come up with a theory of gravitational warping. And really her explanation for gravity is, as she puts it, it's very, very simple. It's that gravity exists in an additional dimension, and that's why we can't really place it in conventional physical theories. And another sort of sphere of interest that led into this idea of redemption and reconstruction was a proposal by the Museum of Modern Art to sort of talk about what was going to happen to New York Harbor. This was several years before Hurricane Sandy. And I worked with an architect called Matthew Baird to propose a kind of crystal reef. Now, this is a project, if there's any venture capitalists in the audience, that I am absolutely convinced the United States spends $70 billion a year on infrastructure maintenance. Let's do it. This is a project to create a series of artificial reefs in endangered coastal communities, which will absorb the storm surge. And the genius, and I use the word genius here, is that it's made of recycled glass, which every major city exports at great expense. So there's a closed loop. We did the math. It's like 3 million tons of glass goes out of New York every year and to be recycled somewhere else. And it could all be reformed into these crystalline reefs, which would then defer the storm surge. That's those structures you can see in the background there. That's the old Rockefeller refinery. The next time there's a storm, and there will be another Sandy, that thing runs a real risk of just being swept into the harbor and decimating all the life that's been so painstakingly restored. So my personal practice, as a sort of as a gallery artist, involves kind of taking all of these ideas and turning them into things. This is the kind of thing I do to entertain myself. And I also make, showing me, what should I do? Painted space, painting as information, performances painting, compositional space, computational space, How does it all fit together? This is a performance piece from Los Angeles that showed up here at the residency, involving, various kinds of monsters, all the things you want to do on the beach in Los Angeles. Monsters, angels, fire, guns, guitarists, classic 1970s, sort of surreal psychedelic trip. At the same time in Los Angeles, I did a piece that was sort of the opposite of that, which is called The Temptation of the Diagram. This is at the Getty. It's a history of the human relationships between diagrams. And as I worked on this project, this is something that also fed very much into the ICA residency. I started to think less about all of the individual diagrams and about what is the topology that allows us to read them collectively. In other words, how does an idea change shape as it moves through time and space? So I did this kind of drawing that linked, thousands and thousands of diagrams together. And then I did a little exhibition, which is of other artists' diagrams and my own. Then I produced this diagram. It's a little faded out here, but it's a diagram of all the diagrammatic systems that have ever been made. And then we got to the ICA. And Jenelle, right around this time, said, well, why don't we do something? I noticed that big red sign is gone, by the way. It's very mysterious. It's coming back? Okay. And this is a very cool and strange building. I came to it when it's opened, and it was one of these buildings that is now entering first it was very futuristic. Now it's, 10 years old. It's starting to look a little tired. And then in about 10 more years, it will be a classic. Because there's that kind of strange thing, which we hope happens to all of us, that we go from young and exciting and of the future to classics. But from the projects that I've shown you, probably you get the idea that my sort of hallmark is a kind of totalizing investment. I'm interested in all the information that's available in a site, whether it's the music that can be pulled out of a site or the physics that can be pulled out of a site. In this case, I was interested in this really remarkable building, what had happened in it and what had not happened in it, what could happen in it and what inevitably would happen to it. All of these things become sort of understandable when you think about a building as something that is not just as you encounter it today, but if you knew it 10 years ago and you could imagine it 10 years in the future. So we talked about this, and we also talked about kind of one of the real characteristics of the building. It was clearly designed as the city on the hill, the shining city on the hill that John F. Kennedy talked about, that Ronald Reagan talked about. But it's actually from a famous sermon by John Winthrop, the first Governor General of Massachusetts Bay Colony. And he's referring to this very weird sermon called the Sermon of Salt and Light, which sort of says, we are the city on the hill, which is not, as it's interpreted, typically as a sort of hallmark of exceptionalism. It's an obligation towards exceptionalism. It's not simply that everyone's going to look at you and say you're great. It's that they're going to really look at you, so you better be great. And also, it says, don't throw away the salt, which is the subject of a great deal of internet confused commentary, what exactly that means. But it's generally good advice, I think. Don't throw away the salt, because you might want it to salt your food. So we came up with this idea of using the volume of the lobby as a space that could generate a kind of diagrammatic experience of space and time. This was the beginning of our conversation. And there's only one of these, but it's very complicated. So this is a project coming out of that history of diagrams that I've been working on. This is a sort of summary of 4 different diagrammatic sets of relationships, but they're all really kind of the same in that they have 4 corners, and this is what the American philosopher Graham Harman calls the fourfold object. In the red corner, we have concepts or ideas, pure ideas. If I say to you house, you all know what a house is. But it's not the same house. It's just the idea of a house. In the gold corner, we have what Harman calls our sensual qualities or our social relations, which is the shared meanings and our shared experience of life. In the green corner, we have force relations between sensual objects, which is how we experience real things, the world of real things. And then in the blue corner at the top, we have the pure forces of nature that we can never directly experience. They're simply beyond our capacity to experience. We will only ever experience things as sensual objects. And in between them, we have all the different ways that we connect those different ideas, which kind of doesn't really matter. That's the subject of philosophical debate for thousands of years, is which one of those is the most important. Strangely enough, most philosophers think the one they're interested in is the most important. But you can also boil this down to something Jenelle talks about in her essay, to 4 very simple ideas. One is the arena, the social space that we all live in. One is the facade that we show other people, but we hide things behind. One is the blind spot that people, this is something that those of you who've been in corporate culture might recognize, that our co-workers know about us, but we do not know about ourselves. And then in the 4th, the blue corner, is the truly unknown. This is a management tool called the Johari window that was beloved by the not to me dearly missed Donald Rumsfeld when he goes, the known unknowns, in his famous quote. So according to this, we sort of talked about this is the arena, this is the Boston Greenway, the public space, known to others, known to ourselves. This was a fantastic opportunity to make a work on this kind of scale that so many people were going to see, especially because it wasn't going to have to stay and be under the obligations of a sort of permanent. It was the idea of something that was here and then was gone is a very beautiful idea, this kind of ephemeral presence on such a vast scale. It's very generous of the city to think about offering this. And of course, you can sort of see in this undoctored, I swear, photograph, it's supposed to sort of merge with the sky. And then we talked about the facade, which obviously became the facade of the building was the logical choice. And you can see there in the background, one of the kind of key characteristics of the site was knowing that it was going to be a building site, and that during the lifespan of this window, and happily for me, no one had ever used the window before. And by the end of this residency, no one will ever be able to use it again because there'll be a big building there. So it was really a kind of special idea about in time and space, what do you do for a moment? When you have this change. So I wanted to incorporate that. So we sort of got to work, and you can almost see the building rising up behind and the cranes as it began to change. It starts to get taller. It's a very beautiful installation process. These are the kinds of things you don't really get to share with people, except now this is kind of the way a project changes and evolves as you're working on it until we get to the final piece. And then there's always the unsung heroes of any installation, the people who actually do all the work, the installers toiling away on the wall part of it. The diagram is a diagram of a very abstracted version of Einstein's first space-time diagram, placed on top of that crazy diagram of all diagrams that I showed you. And then there's this seed coming in, and there's more tirelessly working people. They finally got the artist to do a little work. This is the sort of key to the lobby, which is in the stairwell around the back, which lays out in those 4 corners, the self or society, the theory of things or the concept of things, the actual object in the lower corner. And for me, light is this kind of substitute for the unknowable, where we still are really grappling with what the sort of origin of illumination in every sense of the word. And there it is. It's quite big. She's like, that's quite big. You did that. And then we thought, well, we need to fill the space up. So we filled it up with sound, which is, of course, a form of radiation, like light. So there was a performance by Evan Ziporyn and his 1, 2, 3, 4 quartet, playing away there, which was very beautiful. I hope some of you got to see it in the lobby. And the piece remains as a kind of, this is the score. It's a very complex algorithmic piece with what's called a microcanon, and this is me trying to absolutely, with no result whatsoever, trying to turn it into Lisa Randall's theory of gravity. It was an utterly purposeless exercise. But the piece is very beautiful, and as you tread on the numbers, you can see on the floor there, the piece will replay itself back to you, which the composers have had a lot of fun with. Here's one of the teens who made a very beautiful poem. And this is a QR code. Quickly, quickly, who's got the app? If you did click on the app, which is in the very beautiful book that we've made to go with the exhibition, it played you a little animation and a piece of music. And there were 6 of these distributed around the sites, including the second site, which is the Chapel of Our Lady of Good Voyage, where we did another live performance with Shara Warden, reenacting the performance from the beach that I showed you earlier with a new film. And it's a beautiful chapel because it's really got almost a kind of, it's one of those places that's from both the past and the future, because it seems like what they're really worshiping there is the sea and the inevitability of the sea. You know, it gives you everything, you know, for fishermen, and it takes everything away. And these are some stills from the film, which is of this that we showed. And you can see it's kind of a rotoscoped version of the thing on the beach, which allowed me to add all kinds of extra special effects and peculiar events, like an angel actually arrives and the tower falls that you saw earlier. So it closed a kind of causal loop for me in my work. And I have a show that's just opened in New York. This wouldn't be any kind of lecture at all without some rank self-promotion. So if you're in New York, come and see it at Andrea Rosen Gallery, where the film is now on display, because we only showed it that one night. It was such a special piece. I'm not a filmmaker. I didn't really expect to make a film, so it kind of came by accident, this beautiful thing. And afterwards, we were all like, well, that's almost like a work of art, almost. So we cleaned it up a bit, and now it is an official work of art. It's inside a room that's inside that diagram again, but this time the diagram's a little different in that if you look up very closely at it, it contains a highly abstracted version of about 1,000 of 2,000 human diagrams. It's a history of the diagram from beginning to end. There's a book. You can get it on Amazon. 2 volumes, though. It's not as cheap as I thought, but it's really, really thick. It's really good value. In which are all of the diagrams. And then that gesture from the lobby became this kind of, I was like, well, I really want that to be in space. And this was actually my first idea for the project was I'll make a gigantic sculpture for the lobby. And they were like, you would need a gigantic budget. And I was like, give me a gigantic budget. And they were like, no. So I was like, how about a wall drawing? And they're like, yes. Such is the stuff of good compromises. But I did make the sculpture, and it's this kind of torqued, it's the diagrams, including that Einsteinian, that beautiful gesture from his first book, twisted around each other into a double Mobius strip, which is, going back to the morning line, it's also a double Mobius strip, but it was made of rather clunky tetrahedrons. This is truly, it forms the shape of a Klein bottle, which is in a double Mobius, but in real physics, which is the epikairotic theory of Turok and Steinhardt, who I based that piece on. So it's a really nice closing the loop. And then there's these paintings which come out of the wall. You can sort of see this sense of liquid drift, which we were talking about earlier as like after technology, after networks, after we've all gotten used to super shiny, tight, crisp, clean things. I guarantee you the next trend will be for liquid, slooshy, sloppy, stainy things. I can make that guarantee because I'll probably be too old to care if it comes true or not. But it's quite likely that biopunk will pass cyberpunk, that we will change. It's already happening. There's already phones you can inject under your skin. Kevin was talking about the latest fads in biomedicine are replacing the contents of your gut. We're going to learn a lot more about the insides of ourselves than perhaps we want to. And I think that's part of a change as we approach this kind of more limited, more ecologically bound world. And this is the most recent project. As you can see, it's still under construction. This is a garden I'm making for the Food and Drug Administration. So all this is very much on my mind. It is not, although Jenelle said it might be, the largest QR code in the world. although it's a good idea. But it is full of all kinds of exotic and strange plants, which are all zygomorphic. They match this kind of vertical symmetry of the structures. It's based on a carbon atom. So that's growing in really, really nicely. What it is, the FDA don't really know yet, is it's a garden that's at war with itself. These are all highly invasive species, and over time, they're going to, what looks like a sort of ordered set of plantings is going to become this kind of Hobbesian war of all against all, which is going to be just beautiful once it gets going. The plants are all really quite crazy species, and they're going to really go nuts. There's some cholla there in the front. We've got moon carrots. Moon carrots! Who plants moon carrots? Artists plant moon carrots. Also, monkey puzzle tree, the best, and some very cool, strange pine trees. So that's a little talk about my work, and then I thought Jenelle and I could sit down and chat about the project and all the things that I've missed, and thank all the people that I've thanked. Thank you.
Do you want to be here?
That's for Elijah.
The devil between us.
Once again.
Well, one of the best things about working with Matthew Ritchie is that he does all the work for you. So while I was getting prepared for a long conversation, it's not as much time, which is fine, because I could listen to you all night. I'm Jenelle Porter, Mannion Family Senior Curator, and according to data presented earlier this evening, I definitely have toxoplasmosis. So
You have cats. If you have cats, you have toxoplasmosis.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we were informed.
I don't know how I feel about that, but it might explain a lot of what goes on in my head. So you sort of ran us through many of the things we did on the project, and I thought we should also sort of loop in what everybody is part of tonight, which is another kind of experiment in so many, like in one way to describe it, about what we've been trying to do here at the ICA with you, with this residency, what you've been doing. And when I say we, I mean the entire staff. Matthew and I kind of came up with our own neologism of parameterizing, which was our sort of the way we talked about the project, which is that we were always trying to, push the parameters of what we do here at the institution. So, which means that with pushing comes exploring, discussing, meeting after meeting after meeting, bringing you up, talking to everybody here about what we do at the museum. So, we do exhibitions. We do events here in this theater, a range of performances. We have our teen residency. There's three spokes that are very important to our mission here. And we talk to you about all of them. And your response is essentially to say, okay, where are all the edges we can push at that? So a roundabout way of saying tonight, when we talked about bringing Matthew for a lecture, he said, well, I think we should have a marathon lecture. And I said,
Look at the face.
Yeah. And
No,
as I said, I said,
No.
oh my God, really? And then we started talking about it. We said, actually, that sounds really fun. Other people didn't think it sounded fun because we couldn't really kind of get the marathon going. But we we did start at 5 p.m. this evening, actually. And you're joining us for the last part. Why a marathon lecture? Matthew, why push at all of these points of the museum?
Now you ask?
Well, I know the answer, but nobody else does.
Well, I think going back to that very simple diagram of the blind spot, my blind spot, I think the artist's blind spot is everyone else. We're just notoriously turned inward. And so it interests me to put myself consistently in situations where other people are producing information, because the other kind of job that artists have is to make pictures of something, whether you call them pictures or sculptures or environmental installations or models or however the artist wants to describe, but they're of something. The artist's one job is the artist observing things, and the other is them producing things. And there's a kind of tendency for that to be very closed. Artists, there's a beautiful phrase I learned recently called the Einstellung effect. It's great. It's a great phrase, because what it means is the tendency of experts to pat themselves on the back and say, you know, we've got a pretty good solution here. We've got a pretty good thing going on. Let's not ask any more questions. And as I mentioned, when I stopped making art, it was partly because a sense of that had engulfed my understanding of what artists did. It was really about learning your trick and then selling your trick over and over and over and over again until, like some aging prostitute, people just tired of your trick. And then you had your mid-career crisis.
But you had your mid-career crisis prior to really even becoming an artist.
Yeah,
right?
I've had many mid-career crises. Without even having a career, I've managed to get right through that part.
Get it out of the way. Check.
But I think it's because that is that question of like, well, not so much is it good enough, but is it interesting enough is what's always plagues me. Are we asking, because no matter how well-intentioned we are, no matter how brilliant we are at planning for the future, we're going to miss something, of course. And we nowhere more do we see that than in the consequences of various large-scale, social effects on both the right and left side of the political environment. We do these big projects, and then, boy, do they come back and haunt us. So the question, but I think what artists can contribute is sort of saying, well, let's ask all these questions again. Mm-hmm. And that is also the key that happens in the sciences, is it's always someone like, not that I'm comparing myself to Einstein, but Einstein's questions were very, very simple questions that people had believed had been answered for 100 years. And they were like, who is this Swiss guy asking about that stuff? Nobody cares. We have covered this. Got it. He was like, space, time, important, And it turned out they were. But that's why I think there is no way to know which parameter is not worth pushing against. Mm-hmm. And there is no way to know which system is worth accepting as completely valid, especially as they're all constantly in flux. So that's why I torture people, nice people like you, with endlessly complex.
Gray hair, just more and more gray hair.
Yes.
What do you, for you in this project, which
I'm not naturally gray. I did it as a tribute to Jenelle.
I realized when Matthew showed that long list of things he had done, and it was actually in descending order, that I met you in the very bottom line. We both weren't gray. But I'm wondering what you and we are very much actually in the middle of this residency. I mean, it's been going for a while, but we have more events and more sort of conversations to have internally, and a lot has been opened up. And I wonder if has there been a moment, part of the project, et cetera, that you found is particularly challenging, the most rewarding? I mean,
I know where you want to go with this.
I don't actually know where I want to go with this, so surprise me. And I should say, too, that we started with such a long list of things that range from, pilgrims on fire jumping off the top of the building to...
You would not let that happen.
Goodie bags, which I nixed immediately. But, yeah, what do you...
Well, one, since it's an intimate group, one thing that's really nice is one of the projects that we haven't sort of announced publicly is that I wanted to do something that engaged the store as part of it. So there's a beautiful catalog available in the store.
Here's the other one.
But there's a much smaller number of this book, which is made up of only of stills from the film, which you can't see, and it has the QR codes. This is now ultimately the only place you can get these QR codes when the project is over. But there's an unequal number. There's much fewer of these than there are of these, and these are free. But Richard in the store has the discretion, becomes an actor in the project, and he decides who gets them. So he becomes this kind of strange Dickensian shopkeeper, being like, I've got a little something extra for you. And I thought that was kind of nice because he would, obviously some people will be like, no, thank you, I really, I might be like, I actually don't want, is that a trick? What is that? It's weird, what's in this book? It doesn't have any writing in it, it just has these QR codes and these strange blank pictures and pages. And then part of that is these catalogs were made in conjunction with Connie Pirtle, who is really another collaborator and parameterizer who we've done many, many books with. So it's a kind of commentary on our process, but also about what is free, what is given away by an institution, what are you paying for in some ways, what do you want, what do you not want. So that's a really nice these are only what?
$15.
A week old. No, I was going to say a week old, but also only $15.
I'm so programmed.
Jenelle Porter. Everyone.
Yes, it's true. They just came out last week, and it documents the project and all of the things that we have done.
So if you
thus
smile at
far.
Richard and, give him a little bit of...
Maybe we should
Sonic
share like
handshake.
a sort of a code word with the audience.
Oh,
that
that's
can-
right, like a club you get into, if you know it.
Um,
So that's been tremendously rewarding.
the book.
Bit challenging was the teen project over the summer because I got Lyme's disease, and I was hoping to come up and witness that being... They made this beautiful film. We had this very lengthy sort of, I wouldn't call it teaching, but an engagement based around Chris Marker's films and the tarot. And I was sort of talking a lot about systems of chance and systems of control and how you can use a systemic structure like the kinds I've talked about to produce stories. And it doesn't really matter, taking the tarot as an example, which way you lay them out, you always get a story. And in a way, that's the sort of the metaphor for how they produce their film, which gives me the perfect segue
Oh, God.
to pick a card. Be careful, read the cards, feel them carefully. Which one is speaking to you? Don't just grab one. Are you sure? Oh.
Oh, I don't know anything about the tarot.
The Queen of Cups. Oh, it's nice. It's
Yeah.
good. Yeah, it's a giving, spiritual characters in charge of matters of the heart. Very high ranked. It's a wonderful card. Couldn't have been better.
Thank you. My first reading.
Yeah. Gab got a card, the Nine of Swords, which is just so horrendous. Like this
Cheerleader.
blindfolded figure surrounded by swords. Oh, it's awful. Glad. Happy ending.
I forgot to
Do
do
go
one
on.
housekeeping thing, which is to ask if we asked people to write questions down and sort of pass them up, but
We got one.
one question,
This was from the previous audience, so they may.
and we
person
can
who wrote this
open it up.
may still be here.
Okay, this says, how does the effectiveness of artistic expression change with our technological ability to communicate? And I should ask, this is another part of our trying to be collaborative with our audience. Ask for questions, but they don't like to collaborate as much as we do. Do you need this?
No. I would say not at all. If you look at the earliest cave paintings, they are the most effective. Or in other words, you could say it is not changed or improved or degraded by technology. Mm-hmm. The question that emerges with technology that Kevin and Slavin, Caroline Jones and I were talking about for artists is, at what point does the complexity of a technology's engagement with social structures begin to make it unsuitable for individual practices? In other words, if something belongs so much to the world, it's sort of the shift from if you look at very early film, it's easy for artists to make very early film and very early video. Artists make a ton of but as soon as it became everyone's making a video, because video cameras got cheaper and cheaper, it became actually difficult for art projects. And this is this sort of thing that was very much part of the teen project. It's the Novalis quote, "Everyone is an artist." It doesn't mean that if you give everyone a pencil and tell them to draw on a piece of paper that everyone has made art. It means that everyone should be encouraged to think about things artistically, which I fervently believe, and to imagine the world as the place of the production of art. But technologies that simulate those, so I had a friend of ours, we were on vacation, and she said, "Oh, I made a movie." We were like, "You did?" "Yes, it's of our vacation." We were like, "Awesome." We didn't notice, and she'd been, shooting a little here and there. And she had a program that created rolling credits, cut scenes, fades, dissolves, a Blair Witch sort of effect, music. It did it all. She just sort of pressed a button. It was like, and she said, "I made this movie." And it was really the program had made this movie in the style of somebody else's movie. And that's where technology becomes, I think, really interesting. And since we were talking earlier about this kind of biodiffusion, the moment when we are all able to take our little drink of, it gets very Aldous Huxley in Brave New World, a little drink of Creato juice, and tell ourselves that we've curated our gut for the day. I'm curating right now. I'm curating my internal population. This is an interesting
I
moment.
think
for
we're
artists.
halfway there. You can get a curated condominium,
Yeah.
a curated shop.
You know what I mean? But that's coming. The question is not, is that a good or bad thing, but how do we make it interesting? How do we make it exciting? And how do we tap everyone's creative potential rather than just making everyone more passive? Because the more creative they are, the more fully engaged they are in the big questions of being human.
And if art can sort of, if art exists so much in the world as you're talking about it in terms of this quote, I wonder how you consider the museum as a place for art making, especially with regard to the way you work, which is often collaborative and often even site-specific. I mean, how does making art in the world differ from making art in an institution, which is often considered a sort of rarefied space?
Well, I think that's where the ICA is really strong, and I'm not just shining your shoes. The challenges that this institution asks me are not asked by most institutions. They may pay a little lip service to them, but what they really mean is kind of don't interfere with the parameters of the, and this may be as, they get the credit for hiring you and also supporting this project through some very complex interdepartmental negotiations that many other museums would have been like, you know what, we thought that was a good idea, but it really is quite complicated to get all these different things to work together. Mm-hmm. So I think there is this potential for institutions to be laboratories. And I think the challenge is for them also to remain not laboratories in a way, but more like the petri dish in the laboratory where the scientist goes, oh, that has gone horribly wrong. Like sort of Kevin was talking about his horrible giant baby bio thing that he's going to make, which is just genius because you sort of like it can only become art at the moment that it just becomes utterly not science. Mm-hmm. And,
do you think
but
that's what you're doing?
But they keep on feeding it, and they're like, somebody like 10 years from now, it's still in the basement, and they're like, oh yeah, we keep this thing down here, yeah. Stopped being science years ago. No one knows what it is. Then now you're talking our language, right? Like you're like, that's very.
I don't know what it is. It's interesting.
Yeah, the unknown.
Yeah. Did you answer my question? You did a little, I guess.
Yeah, a little bit. You said yes.
Um,
How do you feel about the project, Jenelle?
Oh, I think the project has been very excellent, very challenging. It's been going on for a long time. I've enjoyed spending time with you. I'm a little sad. I don't know why you keep coming up here. No. But it has really pushed everything that I hoped for it, actually has pushed the museum, and we have been able to have a lot of conversations in-house, both with you and without you. You've, I think, inspired us to look at things. And so I think that's one great thing that artists do in a museum, in any context, whether it's just allowing us to put their work on view or actually working with us through a set of problems, which is that, this sort of cliched phrase, which I very much believe in, which is that art does make you see things differently, that museums are places where one has the time and space to abstract about ideas without being bombarded by various sorts of media, which are even actually starting to surround us. I mean, I feel like this neighborhood is becoming Las Vegas a little bit. Like everybody's got this giant sign. We don't. Like our building is our sign, and we even sidebar had discussions about what that meant. But I think, but then working with you and bringing you in and your generosity in terms of talking to many people in the museum, the teens, performing arts, et cetera, our director, about everything got people thinking. And I think there's been some successes. I think there's been, probably some failures. And since it's not finished yet, it sort of remains to be seen. There are a lot of other collaborators.
We're planning one gigantic failure before the end, which hopefully will involve fire.
And me in a pilgrim costume. I believe that's where you're going with that. And so a lot has come out of it. It's this sort of thing, I don't like to judge anything for many, many years. I mean, we're not always afforded that luxury, but in a sense, it'll be wonderful to look at this project in 5 years and sort of see what it did, and look again in 10 years. As you said, ask the questions again. You said earlier tonight, too, that you know, you need a system to tell a story, and we've certainly sort of generated a story with this residency to some degree. And I was just thinking, after you asked that question, was sort of what is your system and where are you in it? Are we sort of beginning, middle, end in terms of...
Oh, that's a horrible question. It really is gray hair. That's what you're asking.
Well, she showed a lot of images in the prior presentation that made me feel confused and depressed and toxoplasmosis. Anyway, but this sort of, as systems grow, you know, more complex, they become more similar. And I'm not making a lot of sense right now because you threw out so much information. I thought, my God, where am I going to start with, Matthew? But I do think the story, you know, this, what is the system? What is the story?
Well, I don't know, of course. I mean, I'm sure anyone who's roughly my age grew up on the cusp. In my school, we were the last class that had to use slide rules. The kids below us had calculators.
I think this only happened in England.
Yes, in England, you know, who was wearing top hats and riding horses to school. Of course, as everyone does in England. Except the poor, who have to ride pigs or large mice. I think anyone who straddled the digital divide has seen not just a change in the type of technology. That would be one thing, because people have been working trying to build computers for literally 3,000 years. But in the exponential growth of the use of computers in every single facet of our lives, so that everyone, you know, Kevin was talking about, you can connect. He can literally, probably can connect with this program 2 billion people who have more powerful computers in their pocket than the Pentagon had at the height of the Cold War. So what do we do with that? And that has allowed the world to become massively more interconnected, and that in turn has accelerated this. An absolute, when I grew up in England, there were multiple regional dialects. Wherever you went in England, people spoke almost incomprehensible regional dialects. It's not true. It's much less true in the United States. My wife's family grew up in Rome, Georgia. We went to visit a guy up there who I swear was speaking like Cornish. You know, he was, you know, he's dead now, but he was a sort of ancient migrant, you know, his family had been there for like 250 years, just speaking this like transplanted Jacobean English. It was like you had to sort of dig out your Shakespeare to be like, what did you just say? Did you say we're all bastards and going to hell, or that the apples were ready? So that's all changing, you know, and I think there's a huge benefits to that, and huge. I don't know that will tell us our story, and that is really the question I have for the geniuses at the Media Lab, who are in a way, you know, building tools for us. Is where is the story, and how do we tell the story? Because the tendency is for, you know, you can tell an infinite number of stories with this, or so it seems, but you really can't. You can really tell a fairly fixed number, and that's what Hollywood relies on. And you really, in a way, what happens if you stop asking the difficult questions is you don't want to hear the difficult stories either. And you stop going to the difficult websites and stop reading the difficult novels and maybe looking at the difficult paintings. And I was so relieved, a painting, The Salt Pit, that's in the collection here, which is about, you know, this really rather terrifying place. We were with a group of docents, and one of them said, "Oh, people love this painting." And then one of them said, "Well, actually, I was with this family from Iraq, and they thought it was one of the most terrifying pictures they'd ever seen." So they just saw. And I was like really glad, because they were able to actually decode it. They weren't consigning it to sort of some generic category of things they didn't know. They were like, that looks like home, where bad things happened. And that is a kind of what, in a way, I think institutions can do, is like, by asking difficult questions and placing themselves in difficult positions. Similarly with the 80s show you guys did here. It's like that was a very difficult, challenging time socially that we haven't really reconciled.
Yeah.
That's what I think we can do, and insisting on an agency for artists is to insist on the audience accompanying them on that journey towards agency.
And that gives them, as we saw with the teens today, like tremendous sense of their own power and opportunities to be people.
Yeah. Thank you. We have to wrap it up actually in a couple of minutes, but I'd like to know if anybody has any burning questions, please raise your hand.
Oh, go
Or
on.
if we covered everything. We've marathoned them out too, perhaps.
That's
We were
no,
hoping
no,
that the
no,
marathon
there's one
lecture
right
might
here.
devolve into just antics. Can you repeat the question?
So he's asking if, who were my artistic influences, and I went to a very terrible art school where literally we had to just teach ourselves stuff. So we did, and so we found all of the worst possible influences, like Richard Serra and Frank Stella and David Sally, all these people who've, just terrible artists. Robert Rauschenberg. Because in England we were being taught about just people you should never even think of, like Leon Kossoff, and it was David Bomberg, and this whole school of like how to paint small, muddy, gray pictures. I mean, it was really just a very bad choice I made at a very young age, and regretted, but was too lazy and drunk to leave. So that kind of created a strange like double standard in that all of the people that I admired were not very real or represented in England, so they couldn't have a very real presence in my work. It wasn't until I moved here that I could really engage with their work in a meaningful way. And at the same time, latent in the English landscape was all the people that are ignored, like not so much now, but at the time, William Blake, Samuel Palmer, Turner. These were all super unfashionable because they talked about big concepts, and you were supposed to paint these small, rather dowdy little paintings. So, but I lived where William Blake saw, was the last artist to see an angel in a tree, and that stuff really seeps into you, I think, more and more, especially as I get older. I now sort of see, like, living in that world was much more influential than I thought it was. But what's strange is to look back and see that all of the people that I admire from England are all the artists who were not liked in England either. So it was doubly reinforcing my decision to leave as an extremely good one. Because it's so there's this kind of double parentage, right? The American parentage, which I sort of had to go find my American parents. Daddy, I'm home. And they're like, you're not from here. This is not, you're just like. And I also arrived in America at a perfect kind of historical moment, because all the artists I'd read about in the art magazines in art school, like Sally and Schnabel, I got here in '87 when the art market collapsed. And they were all just hanging out in Finelli's going like, where's all the money gone? What's happened here? And so you could talk to them all. There was like Ross Blackner, and everyone was there. So they kind of went from these like imaginary figures instantly to sort of peers. That's quite correct. See what I mean about the technology? I mean, it's right here with us all the time. But it's like a kind of three-part parentage of influences, and I've never really quite reconciled it in that way, because then you just find more and more and more. There's so much that once you begin to engage in it, not in the art historical way as a story, but in the way of who are you talking to, it's endless.
I think it's actually a wonderful question, because I've known you for a long time. I've knew your work before I knew you, and though you are often talking about everything but art, or as we sort of talk about it in more simple terms, I'm always looking at your work as art. Like, to me, the science is extraneous. I know that you need all those things. You're interested in all those things as a way to make art. I mean, you're making a painting because you're interested in all of those issues. But that's one thing I always end up pushing you on, which is, okay, well, let's talk about art. Like, why are you using red? Why are you using yellow? These sort of very formal properties that I think sometimes we let kind of slide because there are so many other things to talk about in your work. And you see other people see it too. There's like, okay, well.
They're watching.
Yeah, they're watching too. And in fact, actually, what you are making is quite beautiful to look at. And the lobby, project. I love the Art Wall project so much because it really does sort of overwhelm you, all of your senses, and at the same time sort of shield the protected, private, beautiful space of a museum from what's going on outside of our walls immediately, this year.
Yeah, can you imagine? God, it would be so dismal in there if you were just looking at the building site.
Well, it's not entirely dismal. I mean, it's progress.
Oh, and you like those hot guys, right?
And the hot guys. So maybe we should.
I don't like them, or they're
no,
not
those
hot?
were the Red Bull divers. So, that's. Thanks
Well, I always say
thanks for
this
leaving
thing.
that note to wrap it up on.
I always say that this thing to people, I want you to be able to walk into a painting.
Yeah.
But it's true, I never really tell them what kind of painting I want them to walk into. Mm-hmm. But it's all the paintings is what I want you to walk into.
Mm-hmm. And I would like to publicly thank you for making this project for us.
And I would like to publicly thank you
Oh,
for inviting
well.
me. It's really been, working with
Thank
Jenelle,
you.
one of the best creative experiences of my life. So it's just been absolutely
Wow,
wonderful.
thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Matthew. And I hope to see you at the next Artist Voice lecture. Thank you.